Thank you, thank you, thank you. Glad to be back. Today we're going to talk about jurisdictional objects for risk engineers, producers, underwriters, and risk managers. That's right, we've got something for everybody, and this is going to be exciting. I couldn't find hardly anything on the internet about it or on YouTube, so sit back and enjoy this lesson on jurisdictional objects. It seems like it was an important topic, that it's something that just sort of takes care of itself, but when things go wrong, they sort of stumble. So we want to talk about what jurisdictional objects are, why they need to be inspected, and we'll get into why we're doing the risk engineering at these facilities. All right. So first, what are jurisdictional objects? We'll talk about a quick history of how the industry developed. We'll talk about what the current inspection process and practices are. We'll discuss state regulations and how they vary from state to state. And then we'll talk about best practices and how to prepare for an inspection, how to be ready for the inspector. All right, so what are jurisdictional objects? Let's get into that. Jurisdictional objects are basically equipment or systems that have regulatory inspections. They're required to have certificates that prove that they are safe and in compliance. And these objects are typically boilers and pressure vessels. So when you hear about jurisdictional objects, think boilers and pressure vessels. Boilers, right? They look good when they come out of the box. When things go wrong, not so good. This is a boiler, believe it or not. It's outside, and believe it or not, this is a small power boiler. It doesn't exist anymore, but just to give you an idea how big boilers can go, they can get even bigger than that. This is a large, relatively large heat recovery steam generator, or a boiler, connected to a gas turbine. So while the power boiler was bigger than this, it would be considered small for power boilers. This would be considered large for heat recovery steam generator. So how did we get started with jurisdictional inspections? What was the reason for doing jurisdictional inspections? And it started basically because there were accidents in industry, right? We had failures of equipment out there in schools and churches. And if you kind of think about schools and churches, what they do have in common is that they have cyclic operation. The schools shut down on the weekends, the churches shut down during the week, for the most part. So we have periods where we need different heating and cooling on the weekends versus the week. So there's these periods of startup shutdown 50 times a year. So that was part of what drove some of the earlier accidents. We developed safety regulations from these incidents, and we learned lessons, and we put everything together. We came up with the ASME Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code and the National Board Inspection Code, the NBIC. So these are more comprehensive than what we started out with. Let's talk about the current process and current inspection practices. What are we doing? What are we looking for? How does it all work? So the ASME Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code gets us started with design, construction, requirements for inspection, when to inspect. The National Board Inspection Code is what the inspectors are going to get certified to, and they're going to be trained and be able to determine if you're in compliance with the NBIC. So what's the process for determining if we're in compliance with our objects? Well, it starts with a visual inspection. We're going to look at the outside. We're going to look for wear, corrosion, leaks, other visible defects. Then we'll look possibly for an internal inspection. It just depends on the state and how often you have to do internal inspections, but you have to have things cool, clean, you have to have access to the area. Then we're going to look at operational checks. So we're going to look at safety devices such as pressure relief valves, low water shutoff, limit switches, safety shutoff valves. Then we're going to look at instrumentation, gauges, meters, the things that the operators use to run the equipment. If they're not working, how can they run the equipment? Then we're going to look at hydrostatic testing. Has there been any hydrostatic tests, either originally or have there been repairs that have required it after that? We're going to look at pressure testing. They can be hydrostatic or they can be operational. Operational pressure testing, just basically you look at the machine while it's running in its normal operating temperatures and pressures and look and see if everything's okay. You might do that a couple of years in a row, and in the third year you might go inside. So it just depends on the state and the requirements. Next, we're going to do documentation review. We're going to look at the maintenance records. We're going to see was this equipment maintained properly? When it failed, was it repaired properly? Was it inspected properly after the repair? We're going to look at compliance documentation, all the certificates and basically the pedigree of that pressure vessel to prove that it was made by who it was said it was made, where it was said it was made, when it was said it was made. So then we're going to look at the material condition of all of these objects, the boilers and pressure vessels that need to be inspected in this facility. We're going to look at the welds, the tubes, and anything that could leak. That's going to be one of the first things we're looking for. The operational condition, we're going to make sure that it's actually running okay and that everything is safe. We're going to look at a report. We're going to write a recommendations summary, or actually just a report that says this is what we looked at, what we saw, and how we left it. And if there are any recommendations, any corrective actions to repair, then we'd probably be asked to come back out and re-inspect. Follow-up actions just to make sure everything gets done, additional testing possibly to address any of the identified issues. So that was the current inspection process. Let's talk about what's going on between insurance and jurisdictional object inspections. In the early days of the regulations, the state regulators would come out and inspect the boilers. But as the industry grew and we had more and more pressure vessels and boilers to inspect, there weren't enough inspectors working for the government to come out and do all the inspections that were needed. It was observed that the insurance company was also inspecting these pieces of equipment, because if they failed, the insurance company was on the hook for the loss. So they had skin in the game, and they were going to do a good inspection. The last thing they wanted to do is have a boiler or pressure vessel explosion. So the states turned around and said, okay, we will allow those individuals that we certify to be our representatives to go out and issue certificates. So then it came along where some companies that had some individuals doing that realized that they really weren't doing insurance work. All they're doing is inspection work for jurisdictional objects that really has nothing to do with transfer of risk other than for quality assurance. So if there's another way to make sure that the quality is good, the risk doesn't really need to transfer. Now, there are some cases where we see what they call enabling policies, a $1 insurance policy for a $1 premium, and that enables risk transfer, okay? It just depends on the state you're in, whether hoops have to be jumped through to do that or not. But the bottom line is that the people who procure your insurance aren't necessarily procuring your third-party jurisdictional object inspection contractors. In the old days, it just kind of came along as a service that was provided by your property insurance company. It has to be at least 10 years ago that most of those companies have separated that out and either don't offer it at all, offer an unbundled third party, that they will arrange, or they actually continue to do it. So there are a few companies that still do it, and they make money at it, so they cost a little bit more than third parties. The third parties, that's all they do, so they're pretty good at it. They're very efficient. They're not going to miss much, so there's some advantage there. The other thing about transitioning to the third parties, don't you love stock art and no safety glasses and this stuff? All right, so there was a shift, and the artificial intelligence will tell us that it was to get more specialized expertise, more efficiency, and more consistency in the inspections. I told you what it was, but that's what AI tells us what it is. And you call these folks authorized inspection agencies, and the inspector might be the AI. You might hear them referred to as the AI. So they're independent, but they're not, and they're not really connected to an insurance company. They are authorized to issue certificates most of the time. Then there's third party, and the third party are folks that they have specialized knowledge, and the real benefit, especially if they're independent, is that you don't have to change inspectors when your insurance program changes. So like if you had a loss, or if you had an issue where your lead insurance company chose to get out of writing power gen or whatever, or writing chemical manufacturing, then you have to go out and find another insurance company that may want to use their jurisdictional object inspectors. Well, if you already have a program, you don't need their jurisdictional object inspectors. You can have your objects inspected by your contractor, and you pay for them, and you just get the certificate and show that to your insurance company and to the state, because that's the two folks or two entities that are interested in your certificate. So if you like your inspector, you can keep your inspector. Something like that. Now, state regulations and compliance. States have different regulations depending on what states you go to, and that's the beauty of the United States of America. Is we have at least 50 different jurisdictions that, as a citizen of the United States, you can choose what jurisdiction you live in, and if you're doing business, you can pick the state that you want to do your business in. But for the sake of this discussion, jurisdictional objects are everywhere. They're being inspected everywhere. They're just looked at differently when they're in one state versus another. And some of the examples I can give you is, like I said earlier, with big power boilers, a utility may be trusted to just do an external visual inspection every couple of years, and then every 3 years do an internal, or whatever lines up with their outage schedule, just depending on the state and the relationship between the utility and the state. They're going to vary significantly, so check your own states. All right, non-compliance can be significant, thousands of dollars, and it can be per day. So don't let it just linger. Now, let's talk about best practices for jurisdictional object inspections and what we need to do to get ready for one. All right, how do we get the equipment clean, cool, opened up, and ready to look at? We have to plan our inspections and do the maintenance that's required after the inspections, right? So we have to get started with an inventory. And I was talking to my new boss, and she told me that when she took a job that they had jurisdictional object inspections as part of their responsibility, and she had to figure out where the jurisdictional objects were in about 500 locations. So that was a monumental effort. Now, a lot of those objects are already in the state licensing software, and depending on the contractor you use, they may or may not have access to all that already, but typically they can just log into their account, look up your objects, and they'll be ready to go as far as knowing where to go and where to inspect. They may show up to your facility. This is where you have to be careful when there's a transition. These inspectors get their orders and they just go show up to do the inspection. The folks at the plant may have no idea that you've changed service providers, that you've got a new contractor doing this. It's got nothing to do with your insurance, other than the folks that are doing your insurance have also been around jurisdictional object inspection, and they know that your insurance program used to handle it, so they're helping everyone basically find jurisdictional object inspection companies and get your programs up and running. So go out and find those objects and keep looking at them. Now, how do we do it? How do we prepare for an inspection? Well, coordinate with the inspectors. Make sure that they're coming to the right place, the right time, that they need any kind of equipment they need taken care of before they get there. They know where they're going, who they're going to meet when they get on site. Plan for the downtime. If it's an internal inspection and you have to get inside the equipment, then be ready for it to take some time to cool it down and clean it up and get it accessible for the inspector. Get all the maintenance records out. Don't wait for the inspector to get there and ask for the repair logs. Get all the maintenance orders that have been done on that piece of equipment, all the objects, get all the maintenance orders, the maintenance logs, have them on a table ready to go. If they're electronic, have them in a thumb drive that they can take with them, because the last thing engineers want to do is have to follow up with the site later and say, can I get that report? Can I get that report? Can I get that report? Compliance certificates. Make sure that you've got them all. When I go into facilities, I see them typically put on a bulletin board near the control room, where all the licenses might be too for the operators, that kind of thing. Depends on the state. All right, prepare the object. Again, you have to shut it down, cool it down, clean it up, make sure that when they go to look at it, they can access it, that if their scaffolding needs to be built, they've got scaffolding. Drain it, clean it, get all the corrosion, scale, anything that's going to block, they have to look at. The welds, anything that may be in the way. Access points. So when we have the access doors, let's make sure that they're open. Let's make sure that it's safe and accessible. Lockout, tag out. Make sure that the equipment is safe to work on, that it's not energized, and make sure you have ventilation, okay? It's important, especially if you're doing internal inspections, that you have ventilation. Now, I'll tell you a story again. Like I always say, it's not a John Muno video if you don't get one of my stories. So I used to work at a nuclear power plant a long time ago. It was one of my first jobs out of college. And as a intern type student employee, I got to see a lot of the plant. And when they were doing a condenser clean out, they invited me to come along. And when we went inside the condenser, I saw what a dirty job it was. Mike Rowe really needs to go watch how they do these jobs. They're down in the bowels of this condenser pulling out marine life that has made its way through the system, and it's just decaying and rotting in the condenser. Well, while I was in there, they told me that if the circ water pumps got turned off, that a back rush of water would come into the condenser, and that we would feel a puff of air first, then we would be underwater in the dark. And now, I was in a pipe that was 5 feet in diameter, so it was almost tall enough to stand up in. And every 10 feet, there was a baffle that came down about 2 feet inside this big cylinder. So I'm trying to walk through this cylinder, watching these guys do their job, and ducking down every 10 feet to get under these baffles that, you know, created turbulence or fixed the flow. And the lights go out, the ventilation shuts off, and they started screaming. Okay, when your escorts start screaming, that's when you get scared. And they started pounding on the side of the pipe with their wrenches, hammers, anything they had that could make noise. And they said, "Get out, get out." And so I started to just, you're walking in the dark, pitch black dark, and everything's covered in sharp barnacles. It's in salt water, right? So you don't want to fall, you don't want to slip, and you're having to hurry to get out. There's a little speck of light coming from that little hole that you climb through to get into this condenser. And you're trying to make your way over to that, but you have to duck down every 10 feet to get under these baffles. We finally get to that porthole and we come crawling out. 3 of us got out of there, and we see a janitor coming around the other side of the condenser, wrapping up an extension cord. And he said, "Oh, it was the weekend. I didn't think anybody was working." We let him have it. So that was something related to ventilation in confined spaces and inspection. So provide support personnel to help the inspector. That inspector is not going to know their way around your facility necessarily. If they need equipment documentation, you need somebody to escort them. You need somebody that's going to help them get what they need. PPE, ladders, lighting, make sure they have all the tools and equipment. Now, if you go through all these steps to prepare for your inspection, it's going to be great. There might be a little bit of work afterwards, but the inspector is going to find what they need to find. You want them to find everything, because when they leave, if there's something wrong and they didn't find it, they may not be back for a year or 3. So you really, really want them to find it, because what finds problems with jurisdictional objects, if the inspectors don't find them, are fatalities. I hate to say it, a facility that I was affiliated with did have a jurisdictional object explode after I left that company. And the reason was that when the inspector came, the boiler was operating and it was not possible for the inspector to go down into this dead leg airspace. And since he didn't inspect that area, we have no idea. But that's where the explosion occurred. And it's just another example of make everything available so that they can do the inspections. Alrighty, with that, you got another one in the books. That's over 40 now. Please like and subscribe. It gets the video out to more people. If you know some people out there on LinkedIn, let them know they can get some real good risk engineering content here at Energy Risk Engineering Lessons. Love it. Come back. Thanks, y'all.